I'm obviously standing between you and lunch, so I'll keep this as brief as possible. But I want to spend just a couple of minutes to mention a few things that we do, because you might not all be customers to us. So let's just take two pictures and explain what we do. Basically, what Verisec is all about is protecting identity, money, and data. And obviously, I'll be spending most of the time this morning or just around noon to talk about the identity portion of this. But when you go out from here and you pay for something in a local store, for instance, using a point of sales terminal, about half of those transactions will pass over networks where we protect the keys residing on those point of sales terminals or in that infrastructure. If you go to Australia, the same thing applies. Almost all transactions go through networks that we protect in that way. In the US, if you go to Walmart, the same applies there. Or in Mexico, if you go to an ATM machine to retrieve money, that's the type of work we do around money and protecting the keys residing on some of these units. But identity is what I want to spend most of the time on this morning. And if we just look at our product range, or what we call them, because I'll be referring to that, we have on the money and data protection side, it's the Kiava set of products related to protecting keys. On the identity and access management part, the products are called Freya, and there's a whole set of different Freya products to address different challenges within identity and access management. At the core of that, we have our development center, which is Verisec Labs, that basically does all our development work. So in the sense that we work with the Cabinet Office to do a proof of concept around the PCIF, the Identity Federation portions, that's where our Verisec Labs are working right now. We do work a lot with UK government. We've done so for the past 6 years. We have quite an extensive number of references, and we'd be more than happy to share some of those and the stories behind those if you come along to our booth. This is a typical picture from most vendors that sell IT security. I think you'll recognize the type of slide that I'm showing here. It's all about the negative aspects. What happens if you don't invest in IT security? And I've been guilty of that as well for the past 11, 12 years, that this is the starting point of arguing why should you have IT security. It's all about risks. It's about mitigating risks. It's an insurance. It's about organizations risking to lose their trust or data or services, and the same applies for individuals. And the number you see there, I realize that I can't move away from the microphone, but never mind. The big number you see over there, the total cost of cybercrime, is from the Cabinet Office. It's an old report written in 2011, and even though the number itself is very large, it may not be exact, it's an estimate of the type of loss that might be incurred by government and society as a whole. And this is the typical picture that IT security companies will talk about. I like to challenge that view a bit, and I was really happy to see that somebody else wrote a report. It was the Boston Consultancy Group, and they came up with an even more astounding number. It was the €1 trillion number. And that's the value, the yearly value of digital identities. And there's a date there, I think it's 2020 or something like that, estimated. And basically, the Boston Consultancy Group have taken a different perspective on digital identity and put it as a holistic. They've looked at digital identities from a holistic point of view. They've looked at it as the sum total of all information about yourselves on the web. So it could be any type of records. And they've tried to estimate what is the value of using that type of information. And they've broken it down into a number of areas where this value stems from. And we have the automation, which is basically moving paper-based processes into a digital era. And that makes all the sense in the world. And some of the projects we're involved in North America with hospitals has a lot to do with taking existing records and moving them into a digital environment. And you would expect that actually to have happened already. But but things take time, and there's lots of security issues surrounding the access of those patient records once they have been digitalized. It's about enabling users, and in the sense that users can do a lot of things themselves. They can manage their own applications or sign their own forms. We don't need a lot of people to do that. People are getting used to the self-service type of arrangements available on the net. We have personalized content. I'm a father of 2 school children, and obviously when I go to my local council in Sweden on the web, I'm not really interested in old person's care in first hand. I'm usually interested about schools. That's usually the type of information that I'm interested in. Other companies like Amazon are very good at this. They personalize the content for yourselves to make sure that you find the right type of information on the fly when you're there, and make sure that you use that channel of communication instead of switching over to another channel which may not be as cost efficient. It's all about enhancing services and delivering new types of products and services, but in the extension of that, and I'm not actually sure that you'll have a speaker here today from IBM about big data, but there is some really nice examples from big data and mining that information and actually being able to sell that on the open market, because there are large companies out there interested in your traffic patterns, for instance. They're extremely valuable, and it makes sense to be able to sell that and to trade those as an asset, which they really are. From a historical perspective, if we look at some of the challenges that have faced most of our customers, historically it's been very much about the perimeter defense approach. And that's really where we come from. And it's been about remote access for a limited number of users. What we're seeing now is that is very, very much changing. And it's changing in a way that's not very easy to summarize. So what I did was just to put a cloud in the center and put lots of other words around it, because there is a lot of buzz around this. And you'll hear speakers today talking about the G-Cloud or cloud-based computing or services in the cloud. And there's a whole range of different things coming along. Bring your own device, we just heard about. Well, smart cities are an interesting topic to discuss. How can you actually make more efficient services for citizens in a city? But it's really all about change. Things are happening at quite a rapid pace. And our feeling is really that somewhere in here we need to find a trust. We need to find some common level of trust in order for people to use these services and to be able to use the automations and the self-services and all those nice things that we would like to have to save money or to make things more efficient. Let's look at some of the work that we have done in and around England. I think this actually builds, so I'll just press that. To begin with, about 6 years ago, it was very much about the local perspective. And when I say local, I mean basically you're trying to secure access to a VPN, for instance, or a subset of users. And the interesting thing with that category of users is that over time, over the past 6 years that we've worked very closely with a number of councils and local authorities, is that the number of those users has grown quite dramatically, from a few hundred to, in the case of one of these, I think it was Cheshire, that we're looking at expanding that to about 10,000 users. Now that's quite a substantial change in a 6-year time frame. And of course, quite a lot of things happen license-wise and so on if you're entertaining the idea of going from a few hundred users to a number of thousands. So, and that's still a large portion of our customer base. What we saw a few years ago was also neighboring councils coming together and doing work irrespective of the PSN work that was being done. So let's take London, for example. There was a London LPSN initiative, But we saw boroughs like Richmond, Kingston, Merton, Sutton coming together because they're geographically located close by to each other, and they have reasons to cooperate around certain IT services. And we saw that type of neighboring boroughs in this case, or neighboring entities, working together to deliver more efficient services and to save money. And that's been a trend for quite a while. Added to that, we've seen the PSN trend. We've worked very closely with Kent and London to deliver authentication and identity within that perspective, and Cheshire as well. I don't think it's defined as a PSN by itself, but it's a shared services arrangement. And it's all really about reducing costs, both for procurement, for implementation, but also reducing costs for delivering those services out to the citizens. And the nice thing is that, in our perspective, a lot of this work has been done from the bottom up. It hasn't been central government saying you have to do this, this, and this. Central government have added a dimension of common framework, but a lot of this work has been done locally, has been done regionally, and has been aligning with these government initiatives at the same time. So what has central government been doing? And this is, of course, from a Verisec perspective. Central government is obviously doing a million different things, but when we came into the market, it was all about COCO compliance, Code of Connection compliance. And parts of that had to do with strong authentication, of course. Now, very shortly after that, EAS came into the market, and you'll probably remember the DCSF had heading the EAS from the beginning and moving it into the DWP. And now the EAS is more or less dead. It's not alive and kicking in the way it was intended to be. It's been replaced very much by the Cabinet Office, the PSN initiatives, and as a subset of that, the Identity Federation portions of the PSIF. Now, what we found interesting here is that nobody wasted experience from earlier work that was done. So the work that went into EAS, especially around the registration and proof of identity and all those things, that experience has been brought into the work with PSN and the PSIF initiatives. And the same applies for the open standards. So it's very consistent over time. The only big difference is the EAS was based on one central service. Now, if that central service would have gone down or something would have happened to it, then basically there was nothing. And that was a problem. That was one of the problems. The second problem was it was never actually built or intended for the type of volumes that you would expect if every single local authority or a government entity was going to use it for their authentication. So the new drive from the Cabinet Office is really a much more bottom-up approach as well. It can be built from the local perspective and adapting to that common framework that you can find within the Cabinet Office and the PSIF. So what happens when you go in this direction? Now, as long as you're talking about remote access, you're really talking about a subset of users. And even though that has grown for the past few years, it's still limited. Now, what we've seen is certain local authorities moving this type of identity technology into the school system, for instance, and suddenly you get a much larger volume of users. Now, imagine doing this with shared services and maybe potentially at some point in the future looking at citizen access. Now, what happens with the number of users? Well, it grows exponentially, of course, which is a problem because the costs will be exponentially high as well, which really doesn't make any sense. And it is very much stopping this development, which we perceive as a problem. The way we viewed digital identities for the past number of years is that we believe this will be a commodity. It isn't a commodity today. It's actually quite expensive in certain cases. But we believe that digital identities should be an integral part of most systems that you deploy. because it doesn't make any sense to have a silo-based approach where you have different types of identity solutions for different types of services. We do believe that you have to have an unlimited approach to authentication. And that's consistent with the fact that we believe that the marginal cost of authentication needs to be tending towards zero as the number of users grow. That's basically the only way of making sure that digital identities, or strong digital identities, are actually adopted by a mass audience. We do believe that all this technology needs to be very much supporting the government initiatives, and we've done so since the EAS and since then to support those open standards that are available. At the same time, we do believe that you want to stay in control. This is not necessarily something you want to outsource into the cloud and use, what do I know, Facebook as your authentication method. That's not going to happen in the foreseeable future. We do see an interesting market in using digital identities as an outsourced service, but with strict limitations on how you register those users and how you can control those users, whether or not they have to be removed or added or so. So basically what we have done is to put in place, and most of our customers will recognize this, is the fact that we have one price and then you can use this technology as much as you want. And the effect of that is, of course, if you have 10 users, then this is going to be hideously expensive. I acknowledge that, and that's a problem. Most of you have far more than 10 users, and as soon as you start moving into the hundreds of users, this makes sense. When you reach 1,000 users or above, it makes all the sense in the world. And if you're looking at bringing on teachers or other categories of users, this becomes very, very, very cheap. And that's really where we want to be, because we believe that digital identities will be a commodity within the coming years. And if you visit our booth after this session, we can share with you some of the work that was done by local authorities that actually did a case study on how much they were saving from our technology compared to using their previous proprietary solution. And that's, so you recognize it when you come out of here. It's red. It's just out on the left. And there you go.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you.